Welcome to Shannons Club TV, where we look back on the rich history of cars in Australia.
In each episode, we examine our feature car from two perspectives, on the road and in competition. We'll also meet a proud owner and get a market update from the Shannons auctions team.
So let's take a look at the new millennium Holden sedans, which proved that if you're on a good thing, stick to it. The VY and VZ Commodores.
The VY Commodore was introduced in 2002, half a decade after the all-conquering VT. By this stage, Holden's lead over Ford Australia looked unassailable. So essentially, the VY offered more of the same. Revised grilles, new headlights and taillights kept the Commodore looking fresh to compete with the BA Falcon. One highlight was the introduction of a new, more affordable V8 sports sedan, the SV8. A revised exhaust system took the Gen 3 V8's maximum power right to 235 kilowatts. The VY picked up the new Monaro steering system for improved road feel. In 2003, the VY Series 2 brought an upgrade to the Calais. Bigger alloys and firmer suspension differentiated it further from the SV8. And the V8 itself was offered in single and dual exhaust versions, delivering 235 and 245 kilowatts respectively. Mark, if the standard 5.7 litre Gen 3 V8 was making 235, what was the figure for a supercar?
Well, it was more like about 450 kilowatts, or about 600 brake horsepower on the old scale, and that was from a smaller 5 litre V8 that was purpose-built for racing. You know, it's interesting when you look back, by this stage V8 supercars were moving further and further away from their road car origins. When they got to the VY Commodore, that took a quantum leap again, which I'll explain later in the show.
While the VY kept Commodore sales percolating, the biggest news came with the VZ in August 2004, namely the all-new Australian 3.6 litre dual overhead camshaft Alloytec V6. Sadly, this engine proved hugely disappointing. On paper, it was world-class, but in the car, sounded little different from the crude old engine it superseded and gave less of a performance boost than its 175 kilowatts promised. The more powerful Alloytec 190 was marginally better. But it took the Alfa Romeo Brera with an Alfa version of the same unit, yes, the Australian engine, to make it sound great. Shame, Holden. Better news was the new 5-speed automatic transmission at last, and the option of a 6-speed manual behind the Alloytec 190, as in the new SV6 sports sedan. Electronic stability control was standard on Acclaim and Calais. The WL Statesman and Caprice had the more powerful Alloytec V6 or optional V8. The VZ was the last of the VT generation Commodores and, frankly, given the potential inherent in its dual overhead camshaft engine, the most disappointing, a real anticlimax. It sold for just 2 years before the new generation VE arrived, although the utes and wagons soldiered on for 12 more months. Mark, how well did the VY and VZ Commodores fare on Australia's racetracks?
Well, they actually did pretty well, given the fact that they were part of a major initiative to finally put Falcon and Commodore on equal terms. The VY Commodore had a challenging introduction to V8 supercar racing in 2003 due to the category's bold engineering strategy called Project Blueprint. This successfully aligned the two greatest differences between Falcon and Commodore, engines and front suspensions, which for a decade had defied all attempts by rule makers to achieve performance parity. However, it was the Commodore which had to undergo the greatest changes in its transition from VX to the latest VY model. Its new engine and suspension had to match the BA Falcon hardware, which was considered superior for racing and therefore the best basis on which a common design or blueprint could be modelled. It was a massive task for Holden teams, so extra time was allowed, with many starting the 2003 season with either VX or VX-VY hybrids before transitioning to the definitive VY blueprint cars as soon as they became available. John, you know, by comparison, the VY road car had it pretty easy, didn't it?
Well, I guess it did. I mean, it didn't have to perform at Bathurst, did it?
And all those changes, yeah.
It just seemed that Holden really could almost do no wrong from the launch of the VT, really.
They were on a roll, weren't they? From VT to VX, it was just made sense just to continue that theme, just with cosmetic changes. And
that's right.
And of course, we saw the new Alloy Tech V6, but that didn't really set the world on fire, did it? That engine.
No, I went to the launch. That was the launch of the VZ Commodore, but they made the big news was the engine.
Yeah.
And I was listening to the presentation and looking at the slides, and I actually thinking, I'm so proud to be Australian.
Yeah.
This is an Australian-designed engine. It's going to go around the world. It's going to be the best engine in the world. And then we drove the cars. And I asked an engineer, I said, what's the story? How do you explain this? And he said something about drive-by noise regulations. And I'm thinking, Maserati, Ferrari, and then you get the Alfa Brera. So it's hard to understand, really. These mistakes do happen.
They do, yeah, for sure. Holden lost the 2003 championship to Ford's Marcus Ambrose, although Greg Murphy in his Kmart VY Commodore drove into the record books at Bathurst with a shattering new qualifying record, followed by a dominant race win with co-driver Rick Kelly. Ambrose and teammate Russell Ingall were again too strong in the 2004 championship with a resounding 1-2 result for Ford. But the mountain again belonged to Murphy and Kelly, taking their second Bathurst 1000 victory in the Kmart VY. Holden teams updated to the latest VZ for 2005, which was limited mainly to cosmetic changes. In response, Ford increased its dominance of the V8 Supercar Championship by finishing first, second and third. But Bathurst continued to elude the BA Falcons, with Mark Scaife and Todd Kelly in their Holden Racing Team VY claiming another Holden win. In the VZ Commodore's second and final season in 2006, Rick Kelly finally broke Ford's championship stranglehold after taking the title fight with Ford's Craig Lowndes to a nail-biting final round at Phillip Island. The VY and VZ Commodores were the last of a generation of Holden race cars, which started with the VT in 1998. And, given the huge engineering changes pioneered under Project Blueprint, they were remarkably successful. Don't forget, you can join the conversation on the Shannons Club forums with a host of interesting topics.
My name's Tony, and this is my 2004 VY Series 2 Club Sport R8. I've had this car for 6 years. It's just stock VY Series 2. It was a low kilometre example when I bought it, so the car was pretty much as you see it now. I like the VY, I love the shape. I think they're a sharp looking car. Being a Series 2, we had the Series 2 updates with the nicer wheels, the full black interior, black leather, the black roof linings. It's got the different front seats so they're not as bulky, and that just attracted me to it. 5.7 Gen 3 LS1. Well, it's a 4-piston brakes all round, and it's got the larger Series 2 exhaust. I certainly like the 5.7. It just makes it a nice driving experience. It's still quite tight, and no squeaks, no rattles. Effortless overtaking up on the highway. There's power there when you need it. And yeah, it's just a great car to drive. And it certainly doesn't feel as big as what it is. I've been with Shannons for 16 years. So I have all my vehicles insured with Shannons. I also have a house and contents with them as well. It was all a good experience. Well, I bought this from a friend, and he's since passed away, so there's always a lot of happy memories. So there's always a special place in my heart. The plan is just to keep the Ks low, still get out there and drive it, but just want to maintain it and look after it. The desire to modify it is high, but it's such a clean example, I couldn't do that.
Well, Shannon's National Auctions Manager, Chris Borobon, has dropped by to bring us up to speed on the VY and VZ Commodore ranges.
Hey, mate. How are you?
Welcome, Chris. I'm thinking most VY and VZ Commodores are just used cars, but perhaps the Monaros and the V8s and the HSVs, they've got a bit of interest for collectors.
Yeah, correct. I think that, we had such a large selection of models that came out in both of those, and I think it's really today for the collectors, really predominantly it will have to be the V8s and the HSVs, and obviously the Monaros as well.
Yeah, because the Monaro became a mainstream VZ model, didn't it?
It is, yep.
Is that sort of the most desirable of the two Monaros, do you think, the last one, the VZ?
Look, it would have to be up there, definitely. I think, they improve things as they went along, and that's, I think the VZ,
more aggressive look,
absolutely. So the VZ definitely with the V8 package, the Holden in the SS models, again the V8s and some of the HSV models are really probably at the top of the tree on those.
One very interesting model was the Adventure, with its pretty good off-road ability and a great car on dirt roads. Is there any interest in those?
That was the cross-track all-wheel drive, wasn't it?
Yes,
Which we saw in a number of different models.
That's right. Yeah, probably the LX8 was the top of the range.
That was the top of the line one. Yeah.
And look, I think a lot of those were obviously used as family vehicles and taken off-road for those adventures. Yeah. But today, if you can probably find a low mileage example in great condition, it might be one of those interesting cars down the track.
And Statesman and Caprice, they're always desirable, aren't they? So imagine in this model range, VY and VZ.
Yeah, they've had their market, haven't they? They've got a special place in the market, I think, the Caprice and Statesman. And I think again, the car with the right history, low kilometres again, we might see something happen on that in the future.
Okay, so what's the natural pecking order for VY and VZ? We start with the V8 high performance models, do we? Or
you'd have to. You'd start with the Monaro, I think, high performance models, the HSV models, and then followed down into the SS V8 models.
Okay, I mean we know that last Monaro was sold as the Pontiac GTO. Left-hand drive form in the US. That'd be a really interesting import, wouldn't it, for an Australian collector?
Wouldn't it be fantastic?
We've seen a few people obviously retrofit the Pontiac GTO fronts on some of the cars here in Australia. So
yeah, good stuff. Thanks, Chris.
No problem, guys.
And remember, you can keep up to date with all the latest Shannons auctions news on the Shannons Club website. If you want a lasting memory of the VY and VZ Commodores in competition, check out the huge archive at autopix.com.au. John, on reflection of VY and VZ, this was during the Peter Hannenberger era at Holden. The model proliferations under him were huge. We touched on in Hammer Time, but there were just so many models, weren't there?
That was his plan. I mean, people generally thought that he was a pretty good bloke, but he was driving the engineers mad with these constant demands for new models. And it looks like some of them must have sold no more than 3 or 4 examples. Like they had so many, such a proliferation. But there were some really good ones in among them. The Adventure was a really good
Still
car.
prized by owners around the country.
And not marketed properly, just not marketed properly, which was a big problem there.
And the SS Commodore wagon, another great model.
Very interesting. Now, Ford never did an XR8 wagon, they did an XR6 wagon, so that's really a neat little niche vehicle, that Commodore SS wagon, I reckon. Yeah.
Cross-track, the all-wheel drive experiment. There were all these four-wheel drives flooding the country. Hannenberger was trying to hit back with local manufacturing. But I think a lot of people saw it as being underdone, like it was a station wagon with all-wheel drive and a thing with all-wheel drive.
That's right.
It didn't look like it was... A lot of people referred to it as half-baked, even though it was a brilliant thing to drive.
Yes.
The perceptions are 9/10 of the law, aren't they?
Absolutely, yes. And then, of course, Ford came out with the Territory, which really cut the ground from under their feet.
That really did.
The Monaro was a high point.
It really was a high point, particularly the VZ model. I love that.
Pretty interesting cars when you look back on them, though. I think as the more years go by, we will judge those cars more favourably, especially as we get a longer look at the VE/VF, because frankly, I don't think they were nearly as good as they were cracked up to be.
The VE/VF?
No, not nearly.
That's interesting, isn't it? Because generally when you get the end of a model line, you've had the VT, the VX, VY-VZ are the best, are seen as the best of that range. So then there's the transition to VE, but you think they were superior to the VE in some ways?
In lots of ways, probably not as safe. But then you've got the primary safety of being able to see where you're going.
Oh, with that,
the pillar and the space use. And really, what they should have done was put that Tirana TT36 show car into production, especially in the lovely pink, I reckon.
Yeah. So I think the VY and VZ will be remembered pretty fondly.
I think they will be.
Yeah. Well, we hope you've enjoyed reflecting on the VY and VZ Commodores, and we hope you can join us next time on Shannons Club TV. Bye for now.